about 3 weeks later, I'm driving back from court, and I figured I kind of had my act together. I'm still very upset. And all of a sudden, those waves of grief hit me. And everyone that's lost a loved one, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You think you have it together, and all of a sudden a tsunami, okay? And when these hit me, and I figured, all right, I cannot walk into my office in tears. And so I got to pull over and get my act together. So I'm sitting in a parking space at a convenience store, but it was, near the road, so I wasn't around people. And all of a sudden, this flash went off in the car. And I looked to the passenger side, and for a split second, I saw my mother's silhouette in a silver white light. And then her voice filled my head. And I heard her say, "You have the gift of mediumship so that you will not be crushed by grief. But now you must help those who are suffering with theirs."
Mark Anthony, welcome to Fear Unzipped. I am so happy to have you here.
Thank you, Sandy. I've been looking forward to meeting you and to doing this interview. So thank you for having me here.
I have to tell you, Jacob Cooper was on, and he's the one who told me about you, introduced me to you, and he said, Mark is the nicest person that you're ever going to meet. And I said, okay, Jacob, I'm in. If he's nice, I'm all about it. and this podcast is about where neuroscience and metaphysics meets, and I can't think of a better guest. So I'm going to talk about your background a little bit. I had to write it down here so I don't miss anything, okay? And then we'll throw it to you. But you're a lawyer and an Oxford educated scholar, an evidential psychic medium. So you are really traversing the worlds, the two worlds. It's fascinating. You're known as the psychic explorer and the psychic lawyer. I have questions about being a lawyer and being a psychic, which I know everybody asks you because it's fascinating. You're the best-selling author of the Afterlife Frequency, which I have right here. People want to see. Highly, highly, highly recommend. Also, Evidence Eternity and Never Let
Eternity.
Evidence of Eternity and Never Letting Go. Books that bridge neuroscience, quantum physics, and spirituality to explore what happens and how we can connect to our loved ones. It's so perfect for Fear Unzipped. And then we'll navigate how fear kind of falls into all of this. So, Mark, welcome. And I like to start with your backstory, because I can't imagine going through what you did from being an attorney to then being a full-blown psychic medium, that there wasn't some trepidation in there, a little bit of fear with that. So can you tell me about your background, maybe your family?
I was born into a family of psychic mediums, and both my mother and father had these abilities. My dad was a U.S. Navy SEAL, and after the Navy, he became an aerospace engineer, but he has been able to perceive spirits since he was a child. Same thing with my mother, and they met at a USO dance. My dad had just gotten out of the Navy, and I tracked these abilities back into the 1890s on both sides of the family. And so Dad said, there he was at this USO dance, and, he's a Navy SEAL, and he was like all full of himself. And he said, I saw this foxy looking dame. He's talking about my mom. And the funny thing about that, Sandy, is my mother at the time was only 19, but he thought she was like 27, 28. And the reason for that is she was a fashion designer, and she worked for a high-end retailer in the New York City area, and Mom said she always got designer clothes wholesale. So she'd be dressed to the nines, and they were both really good ballroom dancers. So they were dancing, and Dad and my mother said there was just something. And it was just beyond that raw, passionate, hey, you're pretty, hey, you're good looking. And so they met at another couple dances, and my mother was a nice Italian Catholic girl, okay? And finally, like on the third or fourth date, she said to my dad, she said, I got to tell you something about me before we go any further with this. She says, I see spirits. Now, she was expecting him to like freak out. Well, he responded as only a sailor could with a number of colorful metaphors, followed by, I do too. And then they realized, oh, there was a connection that went way beyond the physical. And what those of us who study psychic phenomenon and psychic mediumship, it appears to be genetically based. Now, yes, everybody is capable of developing their psychic and mediumistic abilities to varying degrees, but it's what's known as a recessive genetic trait. And what that means, Sandy, is it can skip a couple generations. For example, whether you're right-handed or left-handed is genetically determined. So like what 10% of the people in the world are left-handed, but when you get two parents that have the same recessive genetic trait, then the likelihood one of their children having that trait increases exponentially, and that child was me. So so I show up at, and they didn't plan on me. I have an older sister and an older brother, and they figured we're done. So they had me. They were a little bit older when they had me. And at 3.5, I started talking to invisible friends, which is not unusual for a toddler. But when mommy and daddy can see who I'm talking to, and I remember mommy going, "Oh, he's got it," and dad like, "Ah, geez, he's got it." So their reactions to it were very different. My dad was afraid for me, and this is good that fear unzipped. And if you'll indulge me, I'll tell you why he was afraid. So when I was 5 years old, I started first grade and I was going to Catholic school. Now, my dad was a Pennsylvania Northern Baptist, and he had to convert to marry my mom, and it was like a real big deal back then. Nowadays it's like, you know, um, uh, people don't seem to be as concerned about those type of things, or they're not at all. But he told me, he goes, do not talk to anyone about seeing spirits. You can talk to your mother and I all you want about it, but people who see things others don't will get taken away. And that's a really terrifying thing for a 5-year-old to hear. And he could see I was really scared. And my dad was he was such a good dad. He was a tough guy, but he always, he held me and he says, I'm not trying to scare you. He goes, this is for your own good. And so, and then, when I got into Catholic school and they're talking about angels and saints and all these spirits, I'm like, oh, this place is for me, until I started hearing other things that they were saying. So I followed his instructions and kept it under wraps. What I didn't know, which occurred maybe close to 20 years before I was born, my dad had 4 siblings, 3 sisters and a brother. One of his siblings, Marjorie, she also had the ability, as did their mother, Isabel, and their maternal grandmother, Grace. And my mother had it, and her maternal grandmother. That's a whole nother story. And the problem with Marjorie is that she was married to a religious extremist. Mm-hmm. And he looked at her abilities as evil and negative. So one day he was getting ready for work, and he was a machinist. He worked at the steel factory, the steel plant in Pennsylvania. And Marjorie had a premonition. She had this horrible feeling, sinking feeling in her stomach, and she begged him, do not go to work. Something terrible is going to happen. So they had this big fight, big argument. And she started crying, and he goes, fine, I'll stay home. He goes, you and that voodoo stuff of yours. Well, that day, a crane was lifting thousands of pounds of steel beams, and the cable snapped, and the beams crushed the machine shop that he worked in and killed everybody in it. So had he been at work, there's like a 99% chance he would have been in the machine shop. Well, the thing is, Sandy, you would think he would be grateful. Instead, this intensified his fear of Marjorie, and he conspired with an unscrupulous psychiatrist who diagnosed her as a schizophrenic with paranoid delusions. An ambulance from a mental hospital came to their home, and in front of the whole family, they grabbed Marjorie, put her in a straitjacket, took her to a mental institution where she was forcibly subjected
Oh,
to electroshock therapy for over 6 months. And that's why my dad told me people who see things others don't get taken away. And they did so much damage to Marjorie's brain that she was a shadow of what she once was, and she never talked about seeing spirits again. So when I was a child, there was still, and there still is a stigma, and people are always, poking fun at us and saying idiotic things, because they're ignorant and they don't understand, and people fear what they do not understand, and that's what your work does is let's unzip that fear, bring the light of understanding. There's a difference between being stupid and ignorant. Ignorant is a lack of knowledge about something. Being stupid is a lack of capacity to understand something. And there's people who are both, unfortunately. But the thing is, I didn't find out about any of this, Sandy, until I was in my 20s. And then I realized why my father was always like, don't do this, don't talk about it, because he was terrified that something like this could happen to me.
well, that's right out of a horror film. That story is so terrifying. And I think it happened to hundreds and thousands of people. I mean, yes. And yeah, that is really terrifying. I find it fascinating that your dad was a Navy SEAL, very, I think, left brain. I mean,
Yeah.
and and also a NASA engineer. And still, it's sort of like you. I mean, you're an attorney and you are a psychic medium. Personally, I feel that combination is quite brilliant. But he sounds like he had a lot of tenacity, a lot of fortitude.
Oh yeah. My dad was an amazing person. I mean, we could do the whole show talking about
Mm.
he was very humble and understated. He's one of the guys that figured out how to bring Apollo 13 back. He was part of that team. And all right, I'll tell one story.
Yes.
So he was a young engineer, and this is before I was born. And the vice president of the company that he worked for, at the time I think it was called Reaction Motor, but eventually became Morton Thiokol. And the vice president said of the company, had all the engineers there. He goes, President Kennedy will be making a speech next week that we're going to land a man on the moon and bring him back, and you guys have to figure out how to do it. And they're all sitting there like, they're all like Flash Gordon, because it was science fiction to them. Yes, I mean there had been satellites and things like that, and we had the beginning of the space program, but going to the moon. And so when the engineers were designing the lunar module, the craft that would separate from the command module and land on the moon, my dad said the main thrusters, the main engines are too much power. We have to have a secondary series of thrusters. And he said retro rockets, smaller, that will have less intensity so they can have a softer landing. And all the other engineers started making fun of him, and they started calling him Rocket Man and all this. But the lead engineer said to my dad, his name was Earl, he says, Earl, what's your thought? And so dad explained it to him. Okay. So let's fast forward over a decade. It's now 1969 and Apollo 11 with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. And I've met both of them, which is really cool. I've met both of them through the course of my life. What the public didn't realize is that the lunar module overshot the landing space spot by 20 miles. And in so doing, they burned up all of their reserve fuel and they landed in the Sea of Tranquility. And then, of course, Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon, and then later Buzz Aldrin, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Meanwhile, on board the lunar module, the ignition switch had broken. And Neil Armstrong was the pilot, and Buzz Aldrin was the engineer. Now, think about this. This show is Fear Unzipped. Can you think of being more isolated? You're on the moon, and now you can't start this thing to get it off. And President Nixon was notified, and a speech was prepared because NASA knew exactly how much oxygen they had and when they'd run out of it and when they would die. And Nixon was going to be making a speech about these heroes who are going to die.
Mm.
And so meanwhile, back on the lunar module, Neil says to Buzz, "Can you fix this? You're the engineer." And Buzz Aldrin, and he is still working. He now has an office at Florida Institute of Technology. He's like 90 something years old. There's a trip. He took a Bic pen and he unscrewed it, a Bic ballpoint pen, and pulled the ink part out of it. And he said, "We got one shot at this, Neil." And he took it and he jammed it into the switch, pulled it up. They heard a click, and then boom, the engines ignited. Okay. So they got off the moon. Meanwhile, back on planet Earth at Mission Control, all the engineers, and they're using slide rules back then, not calculators, not computers. They had to reprogram the orbit of the command module because the lunar module had landed in a different place so that they could intercept the rendezvous, in which they did. And I heard Buzz Aldrin say this in a speech probably 20 years ago. He said, he explained, because it had been classified, we had burned up all of our reserve fuel. And if it weren't for retro rockets, we never would have gotten off the moon. That was my dad's idea.
Oh, oh my God. What a great story.
I mean,
You can't make that up.
Yeah, he's not in any books. Well, he's in my books, but there's no stories about this. He's, and he never wanted any fame, but it was my father's idea for retro rockets, which had their own fuel supply. Otherwise, those guys would have died on the moon. And talk about fear. What's one of the biggest fears people have, Sandy, is being alone, being isolated. And think about it, the two loneliest men in history stranded on another planet. And they only
chills while you're saying that. Oh.
And we all at some point in our lives feel completely isolated and alone. And it is a terrible fear. It is a terrible fear. And that's why I'm glad there's your show, because you're telling people, well, number one, it's okay to be afraid, but number two, it's not a permanent condition. And number three, there's an antidote for the poison of fear. And it's reaching out to people. It's realizing, well, maybe you feel that you're alone, but you don't have to be. You can reach out. There are people there who will help you. For people coping with suicidal thoughts, there's 988, the suicide prevention hotline, and there's caring, very compassionate, highly trained professionals waiting to help people that are in that complete state of isolation. So anyway, that's why I wanted to share that story, because I figured that story was appropriate for unzipping fear.
Fascinating story. But the other thing is, Mark, we're never alone. And that's what I love about you, that you have the science behind it. We are never alone. And I try to share that on here, that even though you're in your darkest moment, you are surrounded by so much love and divine love. And that has nothing to do with religion. And what I'd love to do, Mark, is get into, first of all, how you transitioned from being an attorney to being a psychic medium full-time. I mean, what was that like?
Oh, well, it's another story.
Of course it is.
I was always a psychic medium. I always had these abilities. And I actually, when I was in my teens, I was considering going into the clergy. Because that is really not an unusual thing for mediums to be drawn to the spiritual. But religion is so limiting. You can't do this, can't say this. It's this unending list of don't, you're bad, guilt, shame. And, talking to my parents about this, I just felt there were too many rules and regulations. So I ended up in the legal profession, talk about rules and regulations. And in the practice of law, being a psychic medium is part of my skill set. I just knew things that other attorneys didn't. I could discern things from witnesses and prospective jurors and situations. When I was a prosecutor, I'd go out with the cops at night because I thought it was interesting to go out, and I would be with the SWAT team and all that when we raid houses. And because I figured I was only going to be a prosecutor for a couple of years, so I may as well get as much experience as possible. And I remember a couple of the cops saying, "Man, you just seem to zero in on things that we miss." And then I shifted from working as a prosecutor, and I went into private practice, and I worked for a couple different firms until I headed my own law firm. Well, needless to say, I had a very good relationship with my parents. Mom and dad weren't just my parents, they were my best friends. I loved hanging out with them, they were great. And my law office was about 5 miles from where my parents lived. And so one day I was at work and I kept thinking about spaghetti, spaghetti, spaghetti. Now, being of Italian descent, thinking about spaghetti is not an
Yeah.
unusual thing, but my mom called and she said, "Honey, I made spaghetti for lunch. Would you like to come over?" And I said, "Yeah." So I went over to my parents' house because I had about an hour and a half. And when I look back, it's like I really wish I'd had longer, and had a lovely lunch. Mom looked tired. Dad was there. Mom looked tired. And before I left, Sandy, my mother hugged me and kissed me. And she says, "I love you so much. I'm so lucky that you're my son." And I said, "I love you too, Mom." And I kissed her and I left. But I remember when I left and the door closed, the sound the door made, it was like boom, but it was like there was something weird about it. And in my tingly senses, my psychic sense, and I figured because I had appointments that afternoon, it was just the funk and gunk that I had to deal with as a lawyer. Well, the next day I was in court, and the judge's assistant came into the courtroom and said, "Mark, you need to get into chambers right now." Took me into the judge's office, handed me the phone. My secretary was on the phone in tears. She said, "Your dad called, your mom died."
Oh,
Wow, talk about the wind being taken out of my sails. And the thing is, Sandy, I knew something wrong because people are like, "Oh, if you're so psychic, why didn't you know?"
yeah.
It doesn't work like that. We pick up impressions. I felt, plus you can't read for yourself, but I knew something bad was going to happen. I just didn't know what. And I just nosedived into the worst depression that I've ever been through in my life. So then about 3 weeks later, I'm driving back from court, and I figured I kind of had my act together. I'm still very upset. And all of a sudden, those waves of grief hit me. And everyone that's lost a loved one, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You think you have it together, and all of a sudden, a tsunami. Okay. And when these hit me, and I figured, all right, I cannot walk into my office in tears. And so I got to pull over, got to be the man, and get my act together. So I'm sitting in a parking space at, it was at a convenience store, but it was, on near the road. So I wasn't around people. And also this flash went off in the car. And I looked to the passenger side, and for a split second, I saw my mother's silhouette in a silver white light. And then her voice filled my head. And I heard her say, "You have the gift of mediumship so that you will not be crushed by grief. But now you must help those who are suffering with theirs." All right. Now, I've been seeing spirits my whole life, but this was different. And I started breaking out in a sweat. And then all of a sudden, the next message came. "It is your life's mission to help people understand that God exists, that heaven exists, that souls are immortal living beings. Humans can communicate with souls, and we will all be reunited in the light you call God when it is your appointed time to leave the material world." Sandy, I was soaking wet. I sank into my seat, and all I could say was, "Okay." And then the fear the fear gripped me. I can't tell anybody this. They're going to think I'm insane. I mean, people already thought I was weird as it was. But then the fear gave way to the light of understanding. And I realized that my life had just changed forever, and there was no going back. And from that point on, I realized my days in the legal profession were numbered. And not long after that, this guy that I'd known for years contacted me, and he was running for office for a government agency, and he'd won the election. And he said, I want you to head up our judicial liaison. So now I saw that I no longer needed to run a law firm. So I segued over to the government agency. Meanwhile, I started working on my first book, Never Letting Go, which is a guide on the journey through grief. And I brought on to help me on the promotional tour my current manager, Rocky, and she booked me at a speaking gig in New York City, which included an appearance on MSNBC, which is really cool because we were in 30 Rock. And I remember being in the studio next to where they were filming Saturday Night Live, and I'm like, oh God, you know. And then we went from New York to Boston. She got me to speak at Harvard. So I had about an hour before the talk, and it was chilly out. You know, it was a couple weeks before Christmas. We both had steaming cups of coffee, and also my phone rings, cell phone rings, and it's the elected official. He goes, and he started reading me the riot act. You're taking too much time out. The Republican Party is up in arms that I have a psychic on staff, and da. He's just going on and on and on and on. And I said, sir, let me make this very simple for you. He goes, well, how's that? I go, consider this my resignation. I quit. He goes, okay. And I hung up the phone, and then I looked at Rocky and I said, oh my God, I just quit the practice of law. And Rocky said, Mark, take a look around. Where are you? I go, Harvard. She goes, what are you doing in an hour? I said, giving a lecture on the afterlife and signing copies of my new book, Never Letting Go. And she said, don't you think that you're exactly where you're supposed to be?
Oh, I got chills again, Mark. What year was that?
Oh, let me see. That had to be, I think that was 2011. 2011. Yeah.
Still pretty early for this kind of conversation, I think. It seems pretty open-minded for Harvard and some of these other places. Maybe it started before that. The openness about all of this.
Well, Harvard, and I've spoken at Brown, Columbia, Harvard, and Yale. I've spoken at 4 Ivy League universities and several others, and they all have paranormal clubs. There's the Yale Paranormal Society. In fact, in London, there's the London, I think it's the Ghost Club. Charles Dickens was a member of the London Ghost Society. So they've always been kind of fringe and under wraps, but they've always been there. And it's because I talk about how quantum physics can prove the existence of the afterlife. They all gave me a shot. And so that's why I speak at a lot of afterlife conferences. Because yes, I'm a medium, but I'm also a near-death experience researcher, afterlife and spirit communication researcher. Plus, I have a background in quantum physics, anatomy, physiology, biology, theology, philosophy, archaeology. I travel around the world, psychic explorer, examining ancient ruins and supernatural phenomenon. And so that's why I appear on so many different shows. I mean, I just did an episode of Destinations of the Damned on the Discovery Channel, where they had me go in my capacity as a medium and also true crime analyst to the site of a cold case, what is believed to have been a murder-suicide at an abandoned sanatorium in Indiana. And then I've also examined sites in Germany, Central and South America, I mean, all over Europe, all over the United States, the Far East. So leaving the practice of law has just been part of the journey. I had to go through all of that to get the skill set that I have. And I take my logical, analytical mind and apply the scientific method of objective observation to what people consider supernatural phenomenon.
So I love that because I think it's good to go in being a skeptic. There's so much information and misinformation out there, so you really can balance the two together, which is what Fear Unzipped is about. I like that balance of the science and the metaphysic. I had a quote here that I wanted to say that you said that I really love. You don't have to believe in the afterlife for it to be real. It's like gravity. It works whether you believe in it or not.
Exactly. I have people say, oh, well, I don't believe that. Prove it to me. And I always say, well, I'll see you on the other side. And they go, what?
So, can you share with us in lay people's terms, let's say we know nothing about quantum physics, how quantum physics is proving that we are connecting with our loved ones and spirit guides and beings on the other side?
Certainly. In my latest book, The Afterlife Frequency, I introduced the term the electromagnetic soul. So every belief system, Sandy, from ancient Hinduism 5,000 years ago, the Egyptians believed this too, but I'm going to go to the existing religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Native American spirituality. All of them believe that the soul, the spirit, in realms of science and psychology, we call consciousness, soul, spirit, consciousness. I use them interchangeably. That it pre-exists the body, comes into the body, moves on after the body dies. That's why always was, always will be. And people traditionally, people of faith don't question that. People of science look at that as, oh well, that's just fairy tales. But then that brings us to the the first law of thermodynamics and physics, that energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. We know from the field of neuroscience, which is the study of the human brain, that the brain has, it's an electromagnetic field. And even though it's only 2% of the body's weight, it uses over 20% of the body's energy. So we know from quantum physics that everything's made of molecules, which in turn are made of atoms, which in turn are composed of electrons, protons, and neutrons, which in turn are composed of the smallest particle, which is a quantum. That's where we get the term quantum physics. It's a cool word. People, oh, quantum this, quantum that, quantum. But everything in our material world universe on the most basic level is the same form of electromagnetic energy. Now, that means our bodies, you and me, the microphones that we're speaking into, the radio waves the show's being broadcast on, the rays of light from the sun, the rings of Saturn and beyond, are all on the subatomic level composed of electromagnetic energy. And people say, well, that's really hard to wrap my head around. Well, to which I reply, no kidding. It took Albert Einstein, his wife Mileva Einstein, also a genius in her own right, Louis de Broglie, Max Planck, Werner Heisenberg, Niels Bohr, the greatest minds humanity has ever produced, to figure this out. So if you have a hard time wrapping your head around it, you're in very good company. I mean, Werner Heisenberg said, when you think you understand quantum physics, you're really dumb. So the thing is, we're all interconnected. How often do we hear that in the spiritual field? Well, guess what? We are, because we're all electromagnetic energy. But what makes me different and you different from this pen, on the subatomic level, this pen is composed of the same form of electromagnetic energy that you and I are, but it vibrates at a different frequency. So everything in the material universe vibrates at different frequencies. That's why we're alive. So I developed the term the electromagnetic soul to explain in 21st century terms what we really are, which is a spirit, a soul, a spirit, which is eternal electromagnetic energy. So our brain did not create the EMS, the electromagnetic soul. It merely hosts it the way your computer hard drive hosts the programs on it. I mean, our computers did not create Windows. It did not create the programs or the data on it. I mean, maybe AI is going to get to that at some point if it hasn't already, but that's a whole nother discussion. But the thing is, that consciousness is housed in the brain, not created by it. So when we physically die, the organ that is the brain dies, but the electromagnetic soul quantum leaps. In other words, it transfers from this dimension to another one. This provides the basis for eternal life, all forms of spirit communication, whether it's mediumship, deathbed visions, dreams where spirits come and talk to you, near-death, shared-death experiences, deathbed visions, and out-of-body experiences, not to mention reincarnation, because basically our EMS survives physical death, leaves this dimension, goes to another one, and then will come back and reattach to a new host, meaning reincarnation. Now, how do we communicate with spirits? Well, spirits are electromagnetic souls, so our EMS will align with the frequency of a spirit's, and they'll begin to transmit information to us. I can go into a deeper explanation, but that's
brilliantly explained. I think everybody will understand that. So the people who have transitioned or spirits on the other side are at a higher frequency than we are.
Correct.
So somehow we have to elevate, I would imagine, our frequency to somewhere so they can come down and we can go up. Because if we're in a negative state of frequency, anger, jealousy, depression, whatever that might be, it's impossible. It's like a big stop sign. They can't get to us. So it's real. I'm getting chills. It's really important that we elevate our frequencies so they can come and meet us part way. You know, I always say, people say, what can I do? The world's a mess. What can I do to help with anything? And I always say, elevate your frequency. Be kind. Be compassionate. Smile at somebody. I mean, I don't know if people realize if somebody's having a really crappy day and then you come up and you smile at them, that could change their entire trajectory of their life. Anyway, I get so excited about this, Mark, because this is, you know, the juicy stuff for me. I love it. I would love for you to explain why when we are in the shower or we are in the bathroom, we get connected. I get so much information. It's like a portal opens up, and I know there's a scientific, or you have a way to explain that.
That's such a great question, and you're so absolutely 100% on point with that. People say to me all the time, you know, I was in the bathroom, and all of a sudden, you know, I started feeling, you know, my loved ones around. Well, I'm talking about the electromagnetic soul. And bathrooms, a lot of hard surfaces, a lot of metal because of the pipes and the fixtures, a lot of water. Water is a huge conductor of electrical activity. So think about it. You're in this tile, pipes, water. This is electrical paradise. So basically, it's an amplifier, and spirits are in other words, it's like their ability to communicate with you is magnified. Also, if you're in the shower or bathtub or whatever, you're also kind of more relaxed. Mm-hmm. So you're letting down what I call the no syndrome, where people shoot everything down or overthink things. So basically, because water is such a high conductor of electrical activity, as is metal, and then you have the hard surfaces. So let's say you step out of the bathroom and you go into your living room and you have heavy carpet and there's a sofa. There's a lot of fabric there. It doesn't mean that there's any fewer spirits there. It just means from a reception standpoint, you've started muffling and buffering your receptivity. Okay, now for a medium, because we have the ability to open up to those frequencies, it doesn't really make a difference. But for people who aren't necessarily mediums, when you walk into that highly conductive area, then you're going to be picking up on them, or rather noticing them more than you would in the heavily fabriced other room.
I just love that. That makes so much sense. So when you are out and about in restaurants doing your thing, are you always seeing, this is a question that I get, are you always seeing spirits? Are they always talking to you, like tapping you on the on the shoulder and saying, "Hey, I have something to share with you"? What's your experience like with that?
Sometimes yes, generally no. And the reason for that is, see, when I encounter inexperienced mediums, oh, spirits around me all the time, and I say,
Yeah.
don't leave the doors and windows of your house open 24/7, right? Because you don't know if Funky Freddy or Creepy Carl is going to come climbing in. And you don't want to do that to yourself psychically. So an experienced medium defines the parameters of the contact. I'm either doing this or I'm not.
Yeah.
Okay. And so when I'm out, at a store or a restaurant, I don't want to be seeing spirits. I'm there to have dinner or to do whatever it is that it needs to get done. I mean, it's funny. I don't know, I was at Walmart or something, and somebody said, "You're Mark Anthony. What are you doing here?" It's like, well, I've got to be somewhere, And I think I was there to buy a sprinkler part. I was working on a sprinkler head in my lawn, and then people are like, I guess they think I just sort of waft around all day, like not
Float on
having.
the clouds, right?
Yeah, I have stuff at home that breaks down, and I got to fix it. But the it's funny, but there will be times when spirits will start knocking on me to direct me to a particular place. And had a I was in Virginia Beach. I had been lecturing at the Edgar Cayce Association for Research and Enlightenment, and I was at the Ancient Mysteries Conference. And my topic, it was a fun topic. I've done years of research, the secrets, mysteries, and curse of Tutankhamun. And I just loved working on that topic. And so the day after I spoke, we had a free day. My manager, Rocky, was with me. And in Virginia Beach, there's a naval base. I mean, because, the headquarters, the main base for the U.S. fleet is there. And there on the naval base, there's a lighthouse. Actually, there's two lighthouses. There's one built in like around 1800, and then another one built in the 20th century. And so you can go on the naval base to go see the lighthouse, but you got to go through a check and everything, which you should. But the funny thing was, every time we had been in Virginia Beach, and we always wanted to go to the lighthouse, it was closed. And that day I said, I really want to go. We have got to go there. So Rocky says, and it was open. It's the day it was open. And we get in and we saw the lighthouse and all this. And then there was this sailor. He was like an engineer or carpenter. He was working on some stuff. Real nice guy. And I just got drawn to him, and I sparked up a conversation with him. And all of a sudden, I said, "Did your father pass?" And he goes, "Yeah." I go, "Of a lung disease?" He goes, "Yeah." I go, "I don't mean to offend you, but he's coming through." And my manager, Rocky, goes, "Mark is a medium." And this guy goes, "No, no, that's all right. Go ahead." His father needed to get a message through to him. And it was so profound. I mean, this guy, he was a tough guy, and I could tell he was like, I knew he was fighting tears. And his father gave him a really beautiful message about how you never disappointed me. You even exceeded my highest expectations. And then he started talking about this guy's son, who's obviously has some behavior problem. And the message was, be patient with him. He'll grow out of it. And this guy was like, whoa. And the thing is, I have so many stories along those lines where I get directed to a particular place at a particular time, and that guy just happened to be there. I mean, it'd been an hour either way, he wouldn't have been there. And so, to answer your question directly, I'm not always open, but sometimes the collective consciousness, which is all the spirits, they have a different agenda. That guy, and he was an awesome guy, he needed that message from his dad. I mean, things like that happen to me a lot. So, and that's why I always tell people, is it okay? Am I offending you? This guy was like, no, go right ahead. And so it was really an honor to be in the right place at the right time.
I can't think of a more beautiful message for a parent to give a child. It's everybody, I think every child wants to hear that. And then his son, if he's having trouble with his son, he's probably thinking, is my son going to be like this the rest of his life? And I want to help him. Just getting those words from his dad, he just changed that guy's life that day. Oh, it's really beautiful. I have a question about, I think you and I think the same way about this. People talk about negative spirits and you go into a place. I have heard spiritual people go say, I went into this haunted house and this spirit tried to, or this ghost tried to attack me, but I wouldn't let it attack me. And and it felt so wrong. It didn't feel right. And I had a guest on, Susan Graw, who I love dearly. And she says it's not that there are these evil spirits in the room. It's energy gets embedded in material objects.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I would like you to share your thoughts on that, because I think this is going to help a lot of people that struggle in fear after seeing The Exorcist and things like that.
Uh, yeah. There's three schools of thought on hauntings. One is that a spirit is trapped here in this world, which, in my opinion, is absolute unadulterated nonsense. As soon as your EMS, your electromagnetic soul, is released from your body, you know you're an immortal living spirit and you quantum leap to this higher frequency. People say, but they're trapped here. I go, really? So you're going to hang out in a garbage dump when you could go to Maui? Okay. Second is that spirits will return to a particular location. That one does make some sense, okay? Because they might for various reasons. And the third one is that matter retains energy, vibration. And so a lot of things that are believed to be hauntings are actually residual energy echoes. In other words, usually happens in the place of a very tragic or a violent death, scene of a murder. And think of it's like an echo that keeps bouncing around, bouncing around, bouncing around. And so when you see a spirit in that context, that spirit is no more a conscious spiritual entity than your reflection in a mirror is you. So that's what calls a residual energy echo. And there's people, when they say they do exorcisms or house clearings, what they're doing is you can deflect that echo away. And so that will end that. And when I was doing the investigation on the Discovery Channel, the location that we were at was loaded with residual energy echoes. I mean, there was a lot of people died from tuberculosis there. Then it became a mental institution, and the people were horribly treated there. And then, it was just one series of tragedies after the next. Also, I believe in vortexes. Vortexes are areas. A vortex is like a whirlpool of energy. Okay, have you ever seen a tornado? That's a vortex in the sky. I've lived through a lot of hurricanes and a number of tornadoes, and vortexes are not always your friend. There are positive vortexes and there are negative vortexes. Why? Because electricity is either positively charged or negatively charged. There are several places throughout Earth. It's believed that there's these things called ley lines, and they're natural lines on the Earth's crust that emit electromagnetic energy. Sedona. Sedona,
Yeah.
Arizona is home to several positive vortexes. So is the Giza Plateau where the Great Pyramids are. So is Stonehenge. I mean, you start going to these ancient sites, and the ancient people were able to feel these particular sites. Now, when you're in a positive vortex, like in Sedona, there's a lot of soul searching and raising your consciousness. When you're at a negative vortex, which is what I believe was with that sanatorium in Indiana, and there are other places where there's a negative electrical charge, it can cause people to fall into depression. It can cause them to act out in negative ways. So we always have to be sensitive to our environment.
Wow. What about the Bermuda Triangle?
Oh, glad you asked. I just wrote an article. I write for Best Holistic Life magazine. In addition to my books, if the readers can subscribe, it can be online or you can buy hard copy. Go to bestholisticlife.com. The title of the article is New Angles on the Bermuda Triangle.
Really?
Yes, and I believe that, well, there's different explanations as to what's happening there. And the thing is about the Bermuda Triangle, it's not so much that more ships and planes disappear there than anywhere else in the world. It's how they disappear and why wreckage from these ships is never found. There was the USS Cyclops. It was the largest cargo ship in the world. Okay, weighed like over 1 million pounds. And I believe it was right after or right around World War I. It went down to the Bermuda Triangle. And President Woodrow Wilson said, only the sea and God knows what happened to that great ship. Well, they heard its last transmission, and the Navy was searching the ocean bottom, nothing. Interestingly enough, 2 more Cyclops-class ships disappeared right before World War II in the Bermuda Triangle. They were never found. Now, if 1 million pounds of metal is laying at the bottom of the ocean, it's going to sit there. Why isn't it there? And strange electrical anomalies happen in the Bermuda Triangle. The first one was documented by none other than Christopher Columbus. And so when his fleet, the Santa Maria, Nina, and Pinta, entered what we now know as the Bermuda Triangle, the captains of all the ships notated that their compasses all began acting erratically. It doesn't happen all the time. And then there is, the P-38s, the Avenger fighters, at the very end of, right after World War II, an entire squadron disappeared off the Florida coast. No trace was ever found. And their last transmissions were the compasses are going wild. The thought is that the Earth's crust at the bottom of the ocean is quite thin there, and that molten iron. Okay, what are magnets made out of? Iron. Why are the mountains in Sedona orange? They're high concentration of iron. What color does iron turn when it rusts? Orange. Okay. And that true north and magnetic north are 2 different things. And that's why our compasses will point to north. But over the last century, magnetic north has moved east through Canada by over 100 miles. So the magnetic field of the Earth is constantly shifting. And it is believed that there's certain places on Earth, and perhaps the Bermuda Triangle is one of them, where the crust beneath the ocean is very, very thin, and sometimes it emits these irregular electromagnetic patterns. So if something like the Cyclops a 1,000,000 pound, 400-foot long ship, perhaps a huge magnetic charge is dragging it
Wow.
miles and miles from where it went down. Maybe it pulls it underneath the surface. So just because something is supernatural, I believe, as my dad taught me, that there's a scientific explanation for everything, even the spiritual. And that doesn't take away from the spiritual, the divine aspect of it, but there has to be a mechanism how it works. So anyway, that's just one of the thoughts on the Bermuda Triangle.
That's so interesting. I just heard, ask him about the Bermuda Triangle. That's really funny.
Yeah, that article, I'm trying to think when that one's coming out. I think that may be coming out in October. The article that is currently out in August is called The Miraculous Mission of Dr. Mary Neal and the Spiritual Call to Action. And Dr. Mary Neal, I believe Jacob knows her as well. She is a near-death experiencer, and what happened with her and her near-death experience and is just riveting. It's just riveting. So if people want to read about that, please go to bestholisticlife.com.
It all sounds fascinating. Mark, can you give us, those of us out here, ways that we can connect if we want to connect to a loved one? What are some methods that you suggest that we can utilize?
Well, I recommend all my books, but in particular, The Afterlife Frequency, my latest book, because in that book, I teach the RAFT technique, how to recognize, accept, feel, and trust messages from spirits. And everybody can do it. And the thing is, spirits are around us constantly. They're trying to get messages to us constantly. But people start, oh, this must be in my imagination. It's just wishful thinking. It's a coincidence. So you've got to learn, and I give exercises how to recognize a sign from a spirit. Let's say you're walking down a street and you see a nickel. And every time you see a nickel, you think of your father who passed. Now, is that a coincidence, or is that what I call a frequency beacon? A frequency beacon is where a spirit can direct your attention to something, and the second you look at it, you start thinking about somebody who has passed. That's because that's what the spirit is. That's how he or she is communicating with you. So you've recognized the nickel, you've accepted the contact, but it's the third step. Feel without overthinking. Oh, that's just a coincidence. That's my imagination. Oh, that can't be. Oh, boom. And that's where most people will kill it. Step 3, they torpedo it and it goes down just like the Cyclops and gets sucked into an energy vortex going who knows where. So once you get rid of that overthinking and you feel, then you trust the message. Oh, I've recognized the sign. I accept it as real. I feel it's from my dad. I'm trusting that it is. Once you start doing that, and in the Afterlife Frequency, I run you through I present some exercises to help you do that. I've had so many people, Sandy, contact me and say, wow, that RAFT technique really works.
I think, when I trust all the signs that I get. I know, I can feel whether it's a sign or it's not. I mean, this office is covered in feathers because the crows have given me so many feathers. In fact, this morning before this, they gave me this. It's beautiful for me because it grounds me. It just makes me feel great. But I think we stop ourselves when we just go, oh, I'm making this up. And that's what I try to share in this space, is that if you can get bypass that, oh, I'm just making this up. This is because your loved one who is trying to connect with you is going, darn it, I really wanted to connect. So to honor that connection, just start going, this is something my dad loved. And look, it's in front of me. And I think the more you acknowledge it, the more signs you're going to get. I
Right.
see them on the sides of trucks. I really get them in license plates a lot. It's really funny, and I think people will find their way of getting their signs from their loved ones. Can you share? We're at the end of this, which I can't believe. I could spend another 25 hours with you, which I will. We're going to do this again. But I just want to do quick. I have questions to ask you at the end, but can you share one story that happened that in your mediumship that was just like really, just even struck you as being, oh my God. And I know there's so many, so it's probably impossible,
Uh,
right?
yeah, there's so many.
Or
There's
just one that stands out.
real long, but I got a shorter one, which this happened a couple months ago. I was doing it was a phone reading. I was doing a reading for this woman, and her grandfather came through, and I saw him drawing and drawing. So I'm describing him, and there's a drawing. She goes, "Well, he was an artist." Okay, and I go, "Okay, great." I said, "Now there's another spirit that just came in, standing next to him, and this is gonna sound weird, but he looks like Walt Disney." And the client said, "Well, my grandfather worked for Walt Disney back in the 1920s. He was one of his artists." And Disney said he should have listened. And I said that. She goes, "Oh my God." And then another spirit came in, which was the grandfather's wife. And she goes, "Yes, he should have listened." And my client goes, "My grandfather was working for Walt Disney, and Disney liked him so much, and he was so talented. He said, if you stay on, I'll give you 10% of the company to keep you on." And my grandfather said, "Nah, this is going nowhere. We'll never make any money off cartoons."
Really smart move.
Can you even begin to
No,
fathom what 10% of the Walt Disney Company would be worth?
no, that is that's tragic.
Well, but it was kind of funny, and I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm talking to Walt Disney." I was like, because I've done readings for movie stars, for politicians, for royalty a lot, but it doesn't matter who is famous, and famous people will
Hmm.
come through. What matters is the connection, the veracity of the messages, the love, healing, and resolution. So it doesn't matter if your deceased loved ones are famous or not. That's irrelevant. But it was for me. It's like, whoa, Walt Disney. I mean, because I didn't expect that. It was a phone reading. I mean, yeah, I had no idea. And people say, "Well, you research people ahead of time." Okay, so I'm sure if I went to that person's Facebook page, it will say my grandfather, who I never met, worked for Walt Disney and turned. Yeah, yeah, right. Okay.
Oh, that is a fantastic story. Well, I think that is a great place to kind of end on this part of it. I want to ask you these questions. Mark, I've enjoyed this conversation exponentially. I can't even tell you. Um, okay, we're going to do fire away here. So, what's your number one go-to strategy if you're in a bit of mental distress? What do you do?
I go into what the distress is, what the fear is, because sometimes I'll get this sense of fear. And then I say, "Why am I afraid?" It usually happens not long before I walk on to a stage and I'm on television or in front of a couple thousand people in an audience. I do get stage fright. Everybody does. I heard like Madonna completely loses it. Cher, even Paul McCartney gets
Yeah.
nervous before I go. All right, so I know I'm feeling good about that. And what I do is I go into what's making me afraid. And ultimately, in those situations, I'm the one that's making me afraid. So I envision my fear as this kind of slimy type of creature, and I put a cage over it and say, "There, you're locked up. You ain't getting out. You're not going to be scaring me or making me feel bad about myself." And so I actually envision the fear, the distress. I put a cage over it and say, because in the metaphysical world, there's a lot of people like all love is good, all fear is bad.
No,
Hogwash.
no.
So falling in love with a sociopath is a good thing?
Walking down an alley at 2 in the morning and you see some sketchy people, you know,
Yeah,
fear is very,
hi, namaste, you're going to get stabbed to death. The thing is, you can't make these carte blanche statements. Fear exists for a reason.
absolutely.
Think about as primeval humans running around in the jungle, okay, we lived in a group because there was fear of predators. Well, guess what? They're still predators. There's still predatorial people and situations that are out there. So look at fear as being on guard, okay? But don't collapse in it. Instead of looking at the fear as a disabling and demoralizing, look at it as my spider sense is on. So take it and use it. Use it. Now, if you start getting these irrational fears, go into it. Like if you start feeling insecure, do a meditation and say, where is this coming from? 9 times out of 10, you're going to lock on to something that happened to you when you were a child or in your adolescence, and you go there and you identify it, and then you realize, well, that was then and this is now, and I've learned from that, and I'm not going to let that get me anymore. So that's what I do.
That's very familiar to me because I lived my life in a lot of anxiety. So what you just said is very familiar. What's one of the best pieces of advice that you've received professionally or personally?
From my mentor, Father Sonny. Father Sonny, I could tell stories about him all day. When he walked in a room, there was light. He was just a loving, like every one of his sermons, it was always all about love. And we used to talk about psychic phenomenon. He said, well, Mark, what do you think the saints were? He goes, so many of the saints, he said, the Vatican knows about this stuff. He goes, the official line is, oh yeah, don't do that. He goes, yeah, but once you get up the hierarchy a bit, we're very well aware of this. Because if you look at a lot of the popular saints, and that perhaps could be a discussion for our next interview. But what he told me was, we grieve as deeply as we love. Grief is the price of love, but a life without love isn't much of a life at all.
Yeah, 100%. Yes. What does a successful life look like to you?
Health. Material wealth is nice. Being well known has its ups and its downs, but to me, when you're healthy, that's all that really matters. And if I wish I could go around just like health, curing people like that. In a sense, with mediumship, I help people heal from the loss of grief, but I don't get all caught up in, I have this superpower, because healing from the loss of a loved one is a lifetime process, and it's a cross-disciplinary approach. And mediumistic contact, interdimensional communication through a medium is a therapeutic step in the journey through grief. But ultimately, it's up to the individual. We can't change the fact someone we love has died. But what we can do is change how we react to it and how we cope with it. And it isn't easy. It isn't easy, but it's also a matter of survival.
And that's true for our human loved ones and also our animal loved ones. Yes, we all go through that. Last thing is a sentence. Complete the sentence. In the past, I was, and now I am.
Gosh, I just run through so many different things. In the past, I was blue. Now I am purple.
First time I've heard that, Mark. Oh my gosh. Well, where can people find you?
I invite everyone to go to my website, which is afterlifefrequency.com. And I invite you to sign up for my newsletter every Thursday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. I do a live stream show, The Psychic and the Doc. My co-host, Dr. Pat Basili, world-renowned behavioral psychologist. She is a riot, but really good at what she does. And people call in, I'll connect them with their loved ones in spirit. Dr. Pat will help you get the maximum benefit out of the reading by helping you understand that. And that's every Thursday. You can sign up for my newsletter. I'm on a nationwide tour. I'm always on tour. I do online light circle events limited to 6 people. I do public events. So you can find out about all of that and my books and how to order them by visiting afterlifefrequency.com.
And also, we put all of that in the show notes. So if people couldn't, write all that down, it's all going to be in the show notes. So, oh my gosh, Mark. And I would just like to say to the listeners and the viewers how much I appreciate them. They light me up. They really do, Mark. And they're beautiful people. I have just a beautiful, beautiful community, very caring, very nurturing. And if you like this podcast and like what you're hearing, please subscribe, write a review. 5 stars is always nice. It helps. It just really helps. I used to hear people say that all the time. I go, does that really? Yes, it really does.
It does. And for all the listeners, please tune in. I mean, the same thing with the psychic and the doc. The audience is everything. Yes, we do what we do, but by you tuning in and by giving us constructive feedback, there's always going to be the naysayers and the negative people. And the sad thing about social media, which is a wonderful thing, but social media gives bullies, or rather cowards, the opportunity to be bullies. I just see some terrible things people write. And you have to realize, would you want what you're writing to be said about you? I mean, what did Jesus tell us? Treat people the way you want to be treated. And I think, and Buddha said, don't treat people the way you do not want to be treated. So Buddha said the same thing in a different. Every major belief system comes down to be nice, treat people the way you want to be treated.
Yeah.
Let's try it.
It's my mantra. Be kind. Just be kind. And when people react like that, it's out of fear. They're fearful. They're scared. They don't understand it. So they like to stay in their box. And, and I try to be compassionate to that. I've been very fortunate so far. So, but anyway, Mark, it's just been a true pleasure having you here. And we're doing this again. I have so many questions for you. I appreciate your time. Jacob Cooper, thank you for introducing us and much more later, which is what I always say. Oh, I wanted to say this. This is funny. So I have a very beautiful friend who's a medium. And when we get off the phone with each other, I always say much more later. She goes, Sandy, I love it when you say that because I feel like we're always going to have more to talk about. And so I thought, yep, that's kind of my thing. Much more later. Great to see you, Mark. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandy.
Take care.